was disadvantages in some ways, but advantages in others, because Harry had to always fight. He had to fight to get in, he had to fight to stay in. You know, he had all these disadvantages around him, but that may have made him more resolute, more determined to get through it. There is an argument to say that your youngest players end up being your most valuable players. The big but is, if you can't get into the programme in the first place, then you're disadvantaged. Just think about all the players that never even got the chance, who could have been there. There has to be that relationship between the scout and the club and the hierarchy to trust people. So I had a scout once who only brought in 3 players a year, but you guarantee all 3 you sign. One player that we let go, and we said, well, why should we have kept him? He's now an international football player, he plays in the Premier League. One of the big things was because so-and-so brought him in. And every time so-and-so brings them in, they always do it. Therefore, you build up a reputation. So if you bring in your player, you know, I might be going, well, not sure, but you brought him in. Keep the ball, be comfortable with the ball, be able to dominate 1 versus 1. We could add those other aspects. We could teach them how to pass. We could do all of those things. But unless you learn that at the younger age, you'll never have it. You can't suddenly, at 13, suddenly become a dribbler.
You're well known in football, you've got an amazing reputation, but would you be able to just tell the audience what your experience is, what your current role is, and what you've done in football?
Yeah, I mean, you know, you find yourself getting older and older, so your experiences kind of get broader, I guess. I've been very lucky. I've kind of been working with young people, which I would deem it as, you know, sportsmen, sportswomen, but young people for probably 40 years. 20 of those as a youth and community worker in Hackney, running a club called the Crown and Manor Club. In London, people might have heard of that. It's got a kind of a rich sporting history, football probably being one of the bigger sports that it kind of runs and is still running today. And if I look back in terms of my football kind of involvement, that was the very start of it, and some of my proudest moments have come from that. And if we look around the game now, we were talking about somebody like Lee Hayes off air, who's now working in Hong Kong via Japan, via clubs over here. He was a member of Crown and Manor. Mehmet Ali, who's the current under-21s coach at Arsenal. Yeah. He was a Crown and Manor boy. Michael Donaldson, who does the under-16s, is a Crown and Manor boy. Rob Nichol, who works for PJAC, which is the audit company, heads up their education. He's a Crown and Manor boy. So, and there are numerous other ones. So I'm very, very proud of those that have come through from Hackney, from London generally, who are now making their way in the game, that came through that programme, which people wouldn't have heard of, but I'm very, very proud of. And it gave me the opportunity to get involved in football. Met John McDermott then, who was working for the FA, and when he became the academy manager at Tottenham in 2005, I was his first appointment. Hoped I was going to go there as a coach, thought, this is my moment. He said, no, you're not doing coaching. I want you to head up our talent ID. And I'd already started doing some bits of scouting, worked for the FA. I did my A licence, got involved in doing some scouting across the country, got involved with the FA, looking after international teams that came across. So if Spain came across with their international team, I would be the person responsible for them while they're over here. And I loved it, there at training sessions with them, watching the best players, very lucky to have seen some top players from different countries, different coaches. And so John said, well, look, the level, London like the back of your hand. Tottenham weren't really recruiting from inside the North Circular, strangely, we should be really on top of Haringey, but all the best players from Broadwater were going to Arsenal. They weren't really operating in Hackney, Islington, Tower Hamlets, and those were kind of areas that I knew like the back of my hand, and knew people that were running football clubs and football leagues and getting involved.
And what year was this?
2005.
So 2005, you got involved with Tottenham.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
And so, started there and was very lucky to be part of a very incredible project that, again, not only was successful on the pitch and producing players, and that was my role to identify and recruit the best players that we could. And we were miles behind the Arsenals and the Chelseas and the West Hams. We were picking up the players with Fulham and Charlton. That's where we were at that point. And not saying that the club hadn't done well previously, because they obviously have, but it's very easy to take your eye off the ball and forget some of those younger age groups, that pre-academy group and going into under-9s.
Did you have to do something different in terms of the philosophy that was at Spurs before you came in?
Yeah, and I think John McDermott had a very clear idea about how we wanted to play and the philosophy that we would employ to kind of develop really high level players, and I think he had a very modern approach to that, bringing in people like Chris Ramsey and Alex Inglethorpe and others to kind of really cement that, and so therefore we looked at the types of players that we wanted, what we felt was the way that they needed to be developed to make them into Premier League players. We were very aware that to be a Premier League player, to be a first team player at Tottenham, you needed certain attributes that were, when we looked around the team, they were all international players. They came from all over the world. We were bringing in people like Luka Modric, and we had to find players and develop players that could go in there and take their place. So when we had an Andros Townsend, for example, he was up against, sometimes up against Gareth Bale when we brought him in. But then if Gareth didn't play, Harry would play Luka Modric on the left-hand side. So suddenly Andros has got to be better than those players to get in the side. So we knew that we had to have a development program that would get the players to that level to be able to go and compete. And I think, it was reorganising our scouting system, thinking about where we were looking for players, and just generally changing everything. And I was very lucky that we had a really successful period of producing players that have gone on and done very well within the game.
Well, that was what I was going to ask. Would you be able to just give an outline of that success? Like, what are some of the success stories that came from the time that you were involved at Tottenham?
Yeah, I think there are a list of players that you could go through that, we recruited during that time. So, I was lucky that Harry Kane got released at Arsenal, and my scouts were still very much in contact with his family. He'd been in as an under-8 but decided to go to Arsenal. So we get him in and we sign him, and it wasn't a given that we would sign him. You could see why perhaps Arsenal would let him go. He was a late maturing player. He was a very young player within the group. Physically he was struggling, and I can imagine that he probably wouldn't have necessarily fitted every club's profile. And I guess almost 10 years later, I went back and did a little piece of work with Tottenham around, why did we sign this player? Why didn't we sign this one? What was it? What were some of the things? Just to kind of learn from that. And we talked about Harry and said, why did we? Because it wasn't a given. But there were certain traits, I guess, that he had. And also we were doing a massive project on the relative age effect. So everybody knows about relative age effect, when you're born in the year. And you go, yeah, I know about it, but what are you going to do about it? And it became a bit of a thing at the club. And in the end, Harry's a summer baby. I think he's June or July birthday. That was the thing that got it over the line. It was like, not sure. Okay, look, we're doing this project. He's a really young one in the group. Let's give it the benefit of the doubt. And in my mind, and I say it to all the people I work with, this kind of notion of benefit of the doubt is really good with young players. If you're not sure, I would sign them. I think it was the opposite in lots of places where if you're not sure, we don't sign. If you're not sure, let's give them the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, it's been a hot topic in the project, the relative age effect, hasn't it? Where a lot of parents do talk about their child being a late birthday and the disadvantages that they potentially face.
Yeah, some of them think they haven't got a chance, but then we've just seen the recent England team and it's almost perfectly distributed.
Yeah, and I think it kind of does a little bit. But if you look overall at the European Championship, there's still more born in quarter one than there's quarter four. Okay. A huge disparity. Oh. My argument, and there's two arguments. You could say actually Harry was disadvantages in some ways but advantages in others, because Harry had to always fight. He had to fight to get in, he had to fight to stay in. He had all these disadvantages around him, but that may have made him more resolute, more determined to get through it. There is an argument to say that your youngest players end up being your most valuable players. The big but is if you can't get into the programme in the first place, then you're disadvantaged. So although it might in the end look like an even spread, just think about all the players that never even got the chance, who could have been there. And they're the ones that you think, well, they are disadvantaged. So it is a phenomena that, won't change, because you've always got to have a cut-off. You know, there's always going to be young ones and old ones, whether it's in your education system or within your football system. I guess it's having that in your back of your mind. So when we used to have trialling evenings at Spurs, John McDermott used to walk around and speak to all the players. When were you born? No, not your year. What? Oh, February, January. And he'd come and say to me, Rich, why have we got all these, quarter-one players? And I go, well, the scouts don't know when they select them. They're not necessarily aware. They're just looking for what they perceive to be the best player. But in the end, because it becomes this thing that we are thinking about, our scouts got quite, they're not stupid. So they're thinking, why aren't I getting any players signed? Then they're suddenly looking at the types of players that you're signing, whether they're smaller or technical, or some of them would look at their dates of birth and they would say to me, yeah, but he's a summer baby. And you go, yeah, but he's not good. He's not good. Just because you're born in the summer doesn't make you a good player. But we just needed to be aware of it. So we were probably taking more players in. And the other thing is that we had a kind of a philosophy where we tried to get away with people thinking that you're in the under 11s. Okay, well, you might be in the under 11s, but you could be in the under 10s and you could be in the under 12s. So there's this kind of notion of being transient between age groups. So don't get fixated. Well, oh goodness, I'm in the under 10s, and I need to play up. This whole notion of playing up, and you would have seen it. Yeah. I'll sign for your club at under 9 if he plays in the under 10s. He's got to play a year up. Well, he might do, but he might not. And it's not that bad if he plays a year down, if that's the right thing for the player. So we kind of again changed that, and it wasn't easy because parents still, it's a bit like being at school. If you play up, you're clever. If you play down, you're not so clever. So you want to be playing up, and we were just saying, look, it just depends on where you are as a player, because sometimes physically you're just not able to cope. And if you look at a Ryan Mason or a Tom Carroll that came through our program, even in the under 18s, they were still playing in the under 16s. That was like, oh my goodness, what are you doing? Well, that was the right thing to do, and at the right time they moved up and they blossomed and they flourished, and they end up having good long careers playing in the Premier League.
Yeah, I just want to hear a little bit more around Harry Kane, because I find this fascinating, and I know parents listening, they always find it so interesting, the backstories of players. So, what age did Harry Kane come to Tottenham?
So he was released at Arsenal as an under 11, so he came to us about under 11, under 12.
Okay, and how long did it take for him to get offered by Tottenham?
So we had a very kind of specific way of doing stuff. So he would have come in for a trial and done a 6-week trial, and he went back out. We didn't take him to start off with. Then we played against him. He went on trial at Watford, and he came back into us, and then we made the decision. So it wasn't, I'm not going to say that we suddenly saw the light and just went, oh yeah, we've got to have him. Now, you do that with some players. We did that with Stephen Corker, for example. Got him in one night, signed him that same night. And that was the pressure of other clubs taking him. I think we took our time a little bit with Harry, but not too long. But there were certain traits within him that we thought, he wanted to practice. He loved the game, wanted to practice more than everybody else. He was obsessed with practice.
Ball striking was
ball
good.
striking, yeah. So he couldn't move particularly well, but he could strike a ball really, really good. He was a good lad, and he could score goals. And actually, when you're looking at it, those are kind of gold dust. If you can find somebody who can score goals. I remember somebody saying to me, well, I saw his dad outside. His dad was quite big. I know that's not very scientific, but that was that bit about when he's very small now, maybe he can become bigger and stronger. So there were lots of factors, but most of I would say that, yes, there was the technical qualities, the ball striking, but then there was the psychosocial stuff, which I think is the difference between good and great. Now, I'm not saying that you still need to be technically fantastic. Your game understanding has to be off the scale. You need to be physically capable. But the difference, I think, between good and great is up in your head, and you'll see that for those pairs. And he's one of those, when we were talking about, the physical limitations that he probably still has to this day that he's got to keep on top of. And he has to work hard on it. He does a daily program, a kind of a power program that he does day in, day out. And without that program, I don't think he would have maintained or got to the level he's got to. And that's when you're a multi-million-pound football player. That's really hard to. You just keep doing it, and he does, because that's his mentality. As he does, I still believe he goes out and does 200 left foot and 200 right foot finishes at the end of training. And I was speaking to Grant Holt, who had him on loan when he was at Norwich, and said, I used to say to him, "What are you doing? Come in." No, I've got to practice. I've got to do my shooting. And you go, well, I'm going for a cup of tea. And he'd leave him out there, and that's just the way that he is. And I think that's probably the reason why somebody like that goes on.
Were scouts divided on signing him?
I don't think scouts were particularly. The scout that brought him in knew him and his family really well. And it's one of those, and you'll know from working in a club, you've been working with them pre-academy 7, 8, and you don't get it over the line, and they go off and sign somewhere else. And I've had that, and it hurts a little bit, especially when you think you've got them. And I'm always one to say, well, we can't be talking to them all the time because that's against the rules. They're at another club. But if you've got a relationship, and I do genuinely believe more often than not a player signs for the scout rather than the club. Okay, in that case he didn't. He went to Arsenal. But the relationship was still without that scout and the father. So as soon as he was released, he was in. We also had a phone call from somebody, I won't say who, at Arsenal saying, God, we just released Harry Kane. I'm not sure. I think we may have made a mistake on this one. I wanted to keep him. So we got it from a couple of places. But it was no way a given. And if you look at Harry Kane's journey, he struggled every single year. Every year he was up for, every other year, when he got to 2 years, he was up for, on the retained release, he was on for a release. And it was like, benefit of the doubt, let's just keep him a bit longer. And really all the way through, and on his loans weren't particularly great. He had a decent one at Millwall for a season. In the back end of it, he wasn't even getting on the pitch on loan. And I remember Tim Sherwood saying, well, look, he's a great lad. We really like him. The next loan's got to be one for a sale. And things happen, Europa League qualification, he gets a game, he scores a goal, and and anybody that tells you, and people do now, oh, I knew Harry Kane was going to be a top player. Honestly, nobody did. If you ask people that, the Chris Ramseys and the John McDermotts, we would hand on heart say, no, we never thought that Harry would be the one that becomes one of the best players in the world. That was not, and I think people will say, oh yeah, I knew when he was 8 or 9, I could see it at 11, and people said, oh, I watched him, so rubbish. We didn't, and that's the nature of football. Sometimes we used to talk about the silver medalist or the bronze medalist. It's not always the gold medalist. We took other players. I love John Bostock, and I still speak to John Bostock. John Bostock was going to be the greatest player ever, and John's had a fantastic career. He was the gold medalist, and he never got to the where we thought he was going to get to. And Harry was the silver or bronze medalist who went flying past him and established himself as one of the best players that we've ever had in this country.
Another player was Andros Townsend, one of your players. I remember when you did my level 2 talent ID, he had a really interesting story. Because at a certain age, you guys actually released him?
So when I came in, it must have been at 2005, the first pre-season. It might have been the one after, I can't remember exactly. It was around that time. And he'd been released. And I used to wind Frank Arneson up because I still used to speak to Frank when he was at Chelsea, and others said, oh yeah, it was your signature on the release for Andros Townsend. Oh, I didn't know. And it was, we had pre-season, Chris Ramsey and I and others. And this kid turned up, and he wasn't on the list. And we were saying, well, why are you here? And he said, no, I've come to play. And one of the coaches said, no, we've released him. It was Andros Townsend. So he said, look, sorry, you can't train. You've been released. Oh, okay. Can I not train? No, you can't. So off he went. Came back the next night. No, we told you. You can't. Next night. Oh, come and join in. I remember Chris saying, just come play. And then suddenly it was like, where's his dad? Where's Troy? I think we'd like to re-sign him. He was the best player on the pitch. So again, we'd like to say I could take huge credit for Andros. But if it wasn't for Andros, and if you know Andros, his mentality, it was just his determination. And he lived really close to Arsenal's training ground. Literally, I used to bump into his mum's, and I think it's a Sainsbury's next door to the training ground, Hell End. He could have jumped over the wall and got into Arsenal, but he didn't want to. He wanted to come to Tottenham and carry on. So, again, we talk about this, the mental qualities that you have and the determination. Andros obviously had that.
So are you advising that parents bring their children when they're not on the list to trials and force their way into clubs? No,
I'm not suggesting that. We used to have awful problems where I used to get called into reception where some poor child had been shipped over from some country to say, I've come for my trial. And it's like, where have you come from? Well, I've come from, wherever in Europe or in Africa or wherever. And it's heartbreaking. You're going, no, and you ring up the agent. The agent said, no, it wasn't me. This has been an issue that's going on. And what do? Do you if you say, oh yeah, it's okay, then you just open the doors and everybody comes, and you've got to have some things in place and some processes and policies in place, but it can be heart rendering. But no. So I'm not suggesting you just turn up and rock up, because these days you probably wouldn't get through the front door. Security at Cobham is quite hard.
Yeah. Yeah, a successful time at Tottenham, and then you went to QPR.
Yeah. So I went from being head of recruitment at Tottenham to head of the academy at Queen's Park Rangers.
Oh, head of the whole academy.
Yeah,
were
yeah,
you? Right.
yeah. So I took over as head of academy, but because of whereas most people would maybe have the head of coaching role at that point, it was a combination. Mine was more around the talent ID because that had been my kind of background.
Yeah.
So I kind of took responsibility for that alongside the academy manager's role.
So, and what year was this?
So that's a very good question.
2013.
I was going to say 13.
Left. Yeah.
I was going to say 13. So it was 2013, 12, 13, around that kind of time. We were in the Premier League. Mark Hughes was the manager. We got relegated that season, and then Harry came in and got promoted with the Derby game in the playoffs the following year, and then I was there part of the following year back in the Premier League, and it was an exciting time. It was madness, complete madness. I just left Tottenham, where we just moved into the new training ground, had a lovely office, thinking of this is the business, what the new the Tottenham training ground's like, to suddenly being in porter cabins it was pretty horrendous. Didn't have a training ground. We had our audit for the EPPP coming up. I managed to persuade the Premier League, Jed Rod in the Premier League, to put it back to the end of the season because we didn't have anything in place. We didn't even have a training ground that was suitable. Found a training ground. We moved into where they currently are, actually, in Heston. Managed to get planning permission for an indoor dome, which is across the road in the school. Just about did enough and got us through to Cat 2, which was in some ways a miracle, taking it from where it was to where it needed to get to. We had to do a lot of work, and a lot of people worked really, really hard to get it over the line. The owner, Tony Fernandez, at the time was the majority shareholder. It was really interesting for me, to kind of work with somebody like him, very different from a Daniel Levy, for example. And it was just crazy. It was real madness. But I think we made some good inroads. We had some good players. And I'd like to think from that 2-year period, I think it was successful to get the Category 2, to push a little bit further forward. I think then Chris Ramsey came in with Les Ferdinand, and I think they pushed it again. And they've gone through another change more recently. But started to look at their recruitment strategy, decided that, I remember Tony Fernandez saying to me, if you want us to be the same as Chelsea and Tottenham, and I'm not going to do it anymore because we can't compete. So we went very West London. We thought let's there's lots of good players in West London, and we were very, very kind of London centric rather than just going, oh yeah, we're going to go all over Europe, all over the world. Let's try and keep it to our home turf, because we felt that was an area that perhaps the Chelseas and Tottenhams and Arsenals maybe weren't looking at as hard as they were at some other places. So I think we did a decent job in getting the club up to a certain level, and I think they took it on from there. So 2 years there.
And then you went to the FA.
Then I moved to the FA, got the opportunity to go in as head of talent ID. Initially actually went in for a few months as the assistant. Mike Rigg, who had been at QPR, asked me to go there. He left very quickly to go to Fulham as the technical director, so I kind of took on that role pretty early on. And a great time. Ended up obviously winning the under-17s World Cup in 2017, won the under-20s World Cup. We started a new under-15s program whilst I was there. They had the whole England DNA stuff going on, but I was very involved in the under-15s program because it was a lot of persuading of clubs to release players to come into that. And if we look at it, that piece of influence to try and get the Jim Frasers on board and other people within clubs to release the players to come into the international teams. I think in the end, when we won the under-17s, that was a group that we had from under-15, the Phil Foden, Callum Hudson-Odoi, all of that group. So it was good to kind of work alongside those and see them as young. The Jadon Sanchos, they were young, and some of the players that I knew from Tottenham were in that group. They did well in the 17s. But if you looked at it, and the 20s, we hardly had any players that were withdrawn. All the players were released, which was really unusual. Normally with the under-20s World Cup, you're really struggling to get a team out because it's always at the wrong time. Clubs don't want to release players. It might be pre-season. They want to. I think the only player that we missed out on was Trent. Didn't come because he was literally playing at Liverpool, and we said, well, you always have to think, what's the value of 6 World Cup games compared to 6 Premier League games? 6 Premier League games are probably more valuable if you've got somebody that's going to be playing 6. What we didn't used to like was when a coach would say, "Oh no, I need him. I definitely need. He's going to play all the games," and he just doesn't play any minutes at all. And he would have been better off coming and getting the experience. But yeah, so a very successful period of time. Also introduced the Talent ID education programs, which was something that was very kind of important to me. I'd started getting involved before that. Because when I was at Tottenham, we had to do a talent ID course, and it was pretty awful. It was on the old overhead projector. Wasn't delivered particularly well. I remember walking out of having done some really good work with them. John McDermott, Chris Ramsey, all of us done a conference the week before for our scouts, all singing, all dancing, everything we wanted to tell them. And then the following week we did this awful Premier League course, FA course, which I remember going to see the club secretary. I said, "We're not doing that. That's terrible. It's just completely wrecked everything we've been saying." And of course, once you say that, he made a phone call to the FA. I get a call saying, "Oh, we'd like you to get involved in." So I'd been involved for a little while, kind of getting things up. I had a real kind of before I joined the FA, Dan Ashworth and a woman called Danny Avery, who was head of FA education, asked me to go and present at the Premier League with them about my idea of 5 levels of qualification from grassroots up to technical directors. And going back, I was really pleased that we managed to do that.
Sorry, so you literally created the Talent ID level program that we've got now today?
So that was it was my baby. A lot of people now say that, and lots of people have got involved in doing it, because I wouldn't be capable of actually done all 5 levels, all the content. And actually the level 3, I'd always seen it as a bit like the youth awards, where it was a bit more foundation phase or youth development phase or pro. So you had a kind of a more of a specialism. It's not quite like that. But those 5 levels, I presented that to the Premier League as my idea. So when I joined the FA, we initially started the level 4 because we wanted to get a group together of people that we could kind of be our influence. So Jim Fraser was on that course, for example, Kev Thelwell, Nicky Hammond. I mean, it was a very high level group. But what we wanted to do was get them involved, because if we could, Chelsea didn't used to get that involved in stuff because they thought it was pretty rubbish, and they had to do some of the coaching qualifications, but everything else Chelsea tended to do in-house because they could afford to. They could get the best people in. Having got Jim on it, Jim then was like, "Well, okay, what can you do for us?" And we were like there all the time doing the level 2s or some stuff for their full-time staff. He wanted more and more and more because he was so impressed with the level 4. So by doing the 4 meant that then when we started the level 2, everybody was on board, and the clubs wanted their scouts to do it. We did the level 1, which is an online course, which anybody can do as long as they've got a fan number, which I think is good. Yeah. We then Dan Ashworth and I did the level 5 pilot for technical directors, which was great. And then we introduced the level 3 just after I'd left. So yeah, I mean, it's the only country in the world where we've got 5 levels of talent ID education. So I'm very proud of that piece of work. And we had some real David Court I brought in because I'm trying to also help national coaches identify and select the best players and do the whole process for that for all the national teams, from the seniors all the way down to the under-15s, and at that time men's and women's. The education was growing more and more, so we brought a guy in called David Court from the ECB, and he was fantastic at developing those. So a lot of credit goes to him. We've now got a guy called Dr. Matt Portis, who's taken over the mantle and again has helped develop. Phil Church is kind of responsible now for the technical directors. He's kind of responsible for that and the pro license. So the whole thing has just grown and grown and grown and grown. But yeah, no, I'm very proud of where we've got to with those levels of qualification.
You should be. I mean, yeah, I didn't realise that you founded that. That is incredible. And so that would have been around 2014?
Yeah, when I first went in, yeah, absolutely.
And what changes have you seen with the FA? Because it's really interesting the way that you talked about Chelsea's relationship with the FA, because I've been at Chelsea from 2005, where I had a bit of a break between 2008 2013. But yeah, I've seen the way that our heads of the academy have talked about the FA over the years, and it would coincide with the way that you've described it.
Yeah.
You know, it would be that we would bring in Frank Arneson. Frank Arneson would bring in Dutch people, and we would be getting all of this internal CPDs, and it would be very much just Chelsea educating ourselves. And maybe I think it would be fair to say that there wasn't quite enough trust with the FA at those times. But then I think then with the way that the FA have developed, with all the good people they brought in, that it has got the trust of all the Premier League clubs.
Yeah.
And they're now working a lot more cohesively. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And I think one of the big changes when Dan Ashworth came in as technical director and we started that kind of journey on the England DNA, and I think we were in a position where you looked at various parts of the programme. So our games programme, arguably the club's games programme was better than the international games programme. You know, if you looked at it, started at under 16s, Victory Shield, live on Sky TV against the Irish. You'd had the Nordics, you'd go to Montague, and that would be about it. And we were battling with a Man City or a Chelsea saying, well, the Nordics, where are you going? Oh, it's in the Faroe Islands. Okay, well, we're going to play a tournament in Madrid where you've got Santos from Brazil, you've got Bayern Munich, you've got I think that's better experience than you playing against, the Faroe Islands, Finland and Norway. No disrespect to those countries. And you kind of go, well, yeah, probably. You're probably better off going to play in those games. So the clubs, in terms of their sophistication, was really, really high. And we were no training ground, So the training ground at Cobham or at Tottenham or at Man United was much better than we had for England. So St George's Park was hugely important. We didn't really have a very clear philosophy. We didn't really have the best coaches. We had some really good coaches, but most of those coaches have been out of professional football in clubs for 10, 15 years. So things have massively changed within clubs, EPPP, etc., etc. So having a clearly defined philosophy, I think, was really useful. I think improving the games programme. We tried something different in terms of the specialist coaching model, which is not being used now, but it was just different because we said we can't keep doing the same thing. So let's just do. We had a huge kind of reshuffle in terms of bringing football back to the centre. So there were quite a lot of redundancies at the FA because the staff had got bigger and it grown arms and legs, but we wanted to bring everything back to the centre about national teams, about winning England. Brought different coaches in, looked at different ways of influencing the clubs. Better education, the youth awards, for example, I think was great, on top of the A licence and B licence, etc. The FAYCD programme, where you've got coaches from the FA, Premier League, Football League, going in and supporting coaches on their journey in situ. Just revolutionary things. And the talent ID was part of that, because it was, now how do we influence the clubs? Well, we can influence on coaching because we own the coaching badges and they have to come through us. Well, how do we influence Jim Fraser? How do we influence, the people that were top in clubs that were running the game, the Paul Mitchells, those people? Well, let's have this talent ID path. So now we're influencing a whole nother group. So when I ring up Jim and say, we've got this tournament where we're playing in Val-de-Marne tournament in Paris and we need these players, Jim's like, oh, I can't really say no to you now, because he's kind of a part of it. You feel a part of it. He's one of ours, because he's been through our program of education, and that really helped us get those players in.
I'm just going to interrupt the podcast for 30 seconds to tell you about We Make Footballers. We Make Footballers are the largest football coaching provider to children aged 4 to 12 in the UK, operating across 200 facilities. We focus on developing the individual, working on the technical and physical components of the game, and it's had amazing results, with hundreds of our ex-players joining professional academies and 4 of our ex-players currently playing in the Premier League. Our program is built around small-sided play using indoor and outdoor facilities. Visit our website, WeMakeFootballers.com, to see if we have a training facility in your area.
Just a quick question from me. When creating the philosophy, how did you come about doing that?
I think it took a long time, and I've done a number of different strategies. I'm doing one at the moment for Loughborough University, and as much as the content's really important, I think the process you go through to get to that point is really, really important. So who are the internal stakeholders? Who are the external stakeholders? How do you sit down and work with them? And you need to do that. If you do it, you can spend years and years doing it. So you've got to have a very clear idea. So we had some really good people at the English FA who spent a lot of time sitting down and going through it, thinking about us as a nation. What are we? I think we always, and a lot of countries do it, we copy other people. You know, we see somebody that's really good. The Spanish, they're so good. We need to change it to the Spanish way.
But then surely you'll always be behind.
Yeah. And then it's, no, it's not the Spanish way. No, it's the French way. It's a Portuguese way. And at some point, you've got to recognise that we're not Spanish, we're not Portuguese, we're not German, we're not Brazilian, we're English. Now, we have a melting pot of different people that live here, but we are English. We're an island nation, we're English, and we have to think about our culture and the way that we want to play. And to your point, we're always following, and you never catch up. It's always the next thing. So we had this big thing about wanting to be market leaders, not market followers. And that was a big kind of mantra of ours. And the best day was when I think Gareth had done really well and we were doing well at set pieces, and the Germans rang up and said, what are you doing then? What's this? So they were asking us, and it was always before, no, we've got to go to Germany, find out what the Germans are doing. Now people are coming and wanting to find out what we're doing. And they'll all say, well, you've got loads of money and you can do these things. But that's not true. I think we just had a really kind of clear idea about what we wanted to do and how we wanted to do it. And the DNA was just a fancy way of just saying it's a philosophy. Yeah. It's a way of operating. It's a way of playing. It's a style. We had everything should change. Nothing should change but the size of the shirt. So theoretically, if you went on Hackney Marshes and you could see all these teams, you'd go, that's the England team, even if they're not badged up, just by the way that they played and the way that they were being coached, and all of those things. So it was a very detailed piece of work that a lot of people, led by Dan Ashworth, that kind of led the programme and just gave us a framework in which to kind of operate, which I would say to all clubs need that philosophy. Otherwise, how do you select your players? How do you recruit your players if you don't have...
That's my next question. Do you think the clubs now follow the England DNA, or is it still...
Or just before we get to that question, could I just ask, what is the DNA? What is it?
Well, again, both questions in one, I guess. What I'm not in favour of is like an IKEA approach to football, like flat pack that you build in your bedroom. So every club ought to be different. Every country ought to be different, I think. There might be similarities, but I don't think Arsenal should be the same as Tottenham. They may be, but they'll have some very clear ideas about what's their identity, how they want to play the game, what they think is going to be successful. So if you go back to the England DNA, you used to have the hexagons, things like, the future England player and how we play, how we coach. And it was just giving a clear indication of what that might look like. Now, we've moved on. I haven't been at the FA for a number of years. John McDermott's now the technical director. We don't do the specialist coaching model. There would have been a slight change. But I think, like every club, you want highly technical players that know how to win. And I think at international level, it's different from club level. So I had a big... not difficulty. When I first went in, I had my very much development head on. So my Tottenham experience and my QPR one would be always, it doesn't matter about the result. It does with the first team. That absolutely matters. But everything up to the first team, it doesn't really matter whether you win or whether you lose. It's about how many players go through them. Now, I'm not saying you tell the players that. I want them to have a really strong winning mentality. But for us as coaches, that shouldn't be the main driver. Yeah, look, it's sport, so we all want to win, but that can't be the main driver. The problem is when you get to international level, if you don't win, you don't qualify. So if you go, it's all about development, and then you don't qualify through the elite rounds and you don't get to a European champ, well, that's another 6 games that you don't get. And arguably, if it's a World Cup year, that's another 6 games against better opposition. So you have to win. And so there's a little bit of a contradiction between how do you develop players and how do you get winning teams. Now, in this country, it's simpler in some ways because we would say, well, actually, most of the development of a player is done by their club. So if a player, so Ollie Skip's really interesting. So I know Ollie really well, signed him, the best player under 8s, under 9s. Kind of had a little bit of a thing with England at 15, 16. Didn't get into Steve Cooper's under 17s. Didn't go. His parents rang. Why not? What's wrong with Ollie? And we had Tashan Oakley-Booth and we had Nia Kirby that got into the team. Both great. I think Nia's at Oxford City. I think Tashan's at Lincoln Town. Ollie Skip's a Tottenham regular. But at that point in time, Ollie probably wasn't quite at the level that he needed to be to play for Steve Cooper's team to win the under-17s World Cup. And that might have been some physical limitations, the ability to get around the pitch. There might have been some technical stuff. He went through that and he's gone on. And the others have probably plateaued and gone down a little bit, if I'm being honest. So I think is a recognition that, sometimes these players have to develop within their clubs and come into the England team, and the England team ought to be the best players at that time. And because of EPPP, and I give a lot of credit to the Premier League and EPPP and the clubs, they actually have developed some really fantastic players. I mean, again, I talk about England winning the under-17s. People, it's about St George's Park, it's about England DNA. No, it's because we had really good players that were developed by the clubs, really top quality players. Some of my foreign counterparts will say, oh yeah, but you're very big, aren't you? Big and fit. Because England always had the reputation of just being big and physical. And you go, yeah, well, we are physically good, but we're technically fantastic as well. And that was the difference. We never used to be technically fantastic. We were just big and strong, and then we get found out. Did we have some physicality? Yes. Were we quick and agile? Yes. Was our game understanding tactically good? Yeah. And technically, we were fantastic. You've got Jadon Sancho down one side. You've got Callum Hudson-Odoi. You've got Foden. Morgan Gibbs-White. You've got Phil Foden getting the ball. You've got such good players, and some of them have gone on to the absolute top level, and some of them dropped away a little bit, which is natural.
So going back to that process, you were involved in the 15s to 17s. So how does that come about in terms of recruiting that group of players? At what age does it start, and what sort of profiles are you looking for?
Yeah, so I guess formally it starts at under 15s, but of course you're looking at under 14s because you can't just suddenly magic up a group of players. So we kind of had a process. We changed the name from Scouts to Talent Reporters. That was my idea. I get some stick from it now, but just because we wanted to differentiate between what the clubs were doing and what we were doing at international level. Fundamentally, they were still Scouts. So we had age kind of specialists. So we would have a group that were 15, 16, 17s. They would be in regions, and they would be responsible for looking at the clubs. One of the big challenges was to try and get away from just watching Man City and Chelsea in the big cat ones. Chelsea had, I think at one point, a third of our best players were at Chelsea. How do we then go and look at the players at Shrewsbury or the ones at Burton Albion or wherever they might be? And you'll see now in the squads there's quite a mix. There's some different players, which is great, which I think is really good. And we know in certain positions those people, goalkeepers, if you look at our best goalkeepers, none of them started off at Man City and Liverpool. They were at Shrewsbury, and that might be because they weren't big enough and they were ready to grow, and
they get the most practice.
Yeah, they get the most practice. And also, if you're Chelsea, you probably do go for the physically mature one that can keep the ball out the back of the net. And you're winning the FA Youth Cup, and maybe at Shrewsbury you don't have much option and you get what you get, but those players get more opportunity to play, more practice, etc., etc. So there's a range of different reasons. So we would have then started, and then there was a process of camp. So again, we had this big thing about, we don't want the under-15s to think that they're international players. We don't, and that's hard. And you're trying to tell. I remember doing a session with the parents and the players, and Gareth was the under-21s manager, came in and talked about, do the same things you've always done. Don't go back to your clubs and say, I'm an international now, I should be getting a scholarship. Of course, that still happened because I knew one of the QPR boys went straight back in and, I'm an international now. Where's my scholarship? I want to move. So whatever you tell them, it doesn't always go. But rather than doing it at St George's Park, at that point we did 3 camps in August at Loughborough University because we wanted them to aspire to get to St George's. You don't want to get straight there. And we did it quite differently. So we did 3 camps. The first camp was born for those born in the first 3 months of the year, second 3 months, third. So we're kind of looking at relative age effect. Yeah. So to balance out the numbers coming in, we had equal numbers. Let's say there were 30 in each group, roughly. So 30 in each group. And then at the end, we would then bring them down into a national camp based on those, and that would be at St George's. Then they would start a kind of a mini games program. So that's how we got to that group. And I think it was a really positive way of doing it.
What were some of the main characteristics when you were doing those camps you were looking for in players? Would it go back to the 4 corner modules?
Yeah, to a point. And again, there were certain things within the DNA. So, for example, one of the things that we wanted in possession for our defenders was a thing we used to call look forward, play forward. So therefore, when I was talking to our talent reporters, I'd be saying, can we look, not saying can they pass it short or long, do they look forward and play forward? Because that was one of the attributes that we wanted. And there were many different kind of things across through the different positions, in possession, out of possession, And so we were looking for players that could do those kind of things or had the potential to do them. So we'd want to know, not quite ready now, but we think they have the potential. So the other story, going back to the old days, we were going to release Ryan Mason again on a camp Chris Ramsey and I were doing, and the coach said, "Oh, yeah, we think we'll release him because he can't. He keeps giving the ball away. He's not coping with it." He was tiny. He was a little dot, and what it was it was the right pass. The timing was fantastic, but he couldn't kick the ball 30 yards. He could only kick it 20, so he gave away every time. So the intent. So we talk about intent.
Yep.
So the intent was right, but he just physically wasn't able to do it. So you always have to be careful. So we went, no, he's fine. We just got to keep him in the system, and at some point he will be able to kick it 30 yards. And the coach was going, "Oh, well, okay, well, I'm not sure about that. No, just got to give him time." And we just need to give him the time. And I think the same for England. And I'll go back to my original answer about the clubs being responsible. If you see somebody's high potential, so Phil Foden's tiny. He's always been tiny, but I remember his first day as an under-15 walking behind the goal, and I hear this ball hit the post like, who hit that? And it was Phil Foden. Oh, sorry. And because he could absolutely strike a ball. He was also really interesting because you normally had little groupings. You'd have the London boys, you'd have the Manchester boys. Yeah, they'd all be in little rondos or whatever. And Phil would just go and play with. He was just like the street boy, just getting involved, and he just loved playing football. So he was a joy. But so you have to think, well, who can cope with the demands of it? Who's got the potential? We want highly technical players that can play the game as wanted by us as England, knowing that probably we can't play 4-4-2 and turn around in the corners. We're going to have to play a different type of football at international level. So you want to have players that can play that way. Do they need to be quick and agile? Yes, and they will be. The higher you go up, the quicker and more agile that they are. Do they have to be technically excellent? Of course, their game understanding has to be off. So you're looking for players that generally have those characteristics.
And how is that different from Spain or Portugal?
I'm not sure necessarily is different. I guess they have different types of players, different shapes and sizes, but I think the way of wanting to play the game might not be that different in terms of international. I think it's having a variety of adaptable players that can solve problems. I mean, that's for me. If you've got problem solvers on the pitch, we talk about, Gareth's not doing this or Gareth's not doing that in the European Championships. Well, yeah. I would like to think he's got a group of players that can actually solve some of those problems when they're out there.
I think people feel that he does. I think a lot of people would say that the individuals that England have are some of the best in the world. I think that's fair, man.
I think the hot topic is,
Marcelo just rolled his eyes for the listeners who couldn't see that.
No, the hot topic is England perhaps haven't produced a controller or a player that can dictate tempo or dictate play. I think that's the hot topic.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And if you look, my thing would always be, our expectations are always ridiculously high. And why should they be? You go back to the conversation about outside when we're talking about, well, only 8 countries have ever won the World Cup. So it's not a given that we should just kind of rock up and win it. And probably back in 1966 when we had a Bobby Charlton and people who could control the tempo and who were that good. Yeah, you're right. We haven't produced maybe that type of player. Now, we produce lots of other players in other positions that I think are absolutely world class. But I always look back and think, well, back in the day where you say, oh, yeah, John Terry was fantastic, but he had Carvalho next to him. Maybe that was we often, when you look around the teams, you've got Kevin De Bruyne playing for Man City that makes Phil Foden even better. So it's a combination of people rather than necessarily being the one individual. And maybe we do. Maybe we haven't got that person. And we thought we might have had a Mason Mount that could have done it, but he hasn't really stepped on. There's been some just haven't.
Why is that? Do you reckon? Is it because? Is there more emphasis in the early ages on the physical or other characteristics? The English player the level has gone up for sure. The level now is really high. But yeah, it just seems to be that we don't quite produce that type of player.
I think the problem is, and it's a double-edged sword because I'm not a believer in quotas. So I think the Premier League is the best league in the world. I think everybody do. The best players are playing here generally. Yeah, the Real Madrids have got, but it's a really good league, and I think that's really good. We have less players playing in it. So when I was at the FA, we kind of had around 28% English qualified players playing in the English Premier League. So our pool that we were selecting from was quite small. And people saying, oh, that's terrible. Yeah, we want to get it up to 30, 32. And on a Champions League week, it could be even worse because they just wouldn't play. The counter argument is, well, those 28 to 32% are going to be really, really good to even get in the team. I think when we go back to your question about the kind of the player that can control the tempo, I think if you look at most clubs, we just go and buy them in. They're almost ready-made. We very rarely are prepared to give people time to develop into that role. And I think we do probably have players in academies that can do that, and we do see them under 18s. We do, but for whatever reason, the club then goes and buys Luka Modric, who can do it, or the best player in the world, Kevin De Bruyne, who can do it, rather than saying, well, actually, who's our 18 or 21 but needs a bit of time to develop into that. And I guess maybe that's one of the reasons, because I think academies are producing players in every position. It seems that one position, clubs aren't very patient, and they just want a ready-made player that they go and buy, who is vastly expensive and is the big name.
So how can we get them so they are better than the ones that we're bringing in?
Well, and again, I think it's about the club setups at the top end don't always allow that. You need a Pep. To be fair to Pep, I think he's done a great job, or a Klopp who's going to has a bit of longevity, who's not just thinking about. I was talking with a club yesterday, and they're saying, well, the problem with the manager is he doesn't think he's got more than 8 games, so he's not going to give that chance to the players. I guess as we see maybe some players going abroad, so like a Jude, suddenly thinking, well, actually, I'm better off going to Germany. I'm not saying he's going to be the answer, but maybe getting lots of game time away, which is unheard of in English football. We didn't really export players at a young age. We're doing more of that. Maybe we'll see in the Championship the level closing up a little bit, and some of those clubs maybe can start producing, and maybe under less pressure in the Championship to give players an opportunity. But yeah, I don't think there's any clever answer that I can suddenly say. I think clubs are working really hard to do it. I think it's for us to then, at international level, to be able to identify those players and somehow, whether it's through the national team system, give them the opportunity to play. But for the England senior team, rarely, unless they're playing for a Premier League side or a top European side, they're not going to get in the team. So it's difficult.
All the current England side that started with their academies from under 9, and we know now in England that football recruitment starts from under 6, under 7, pre-academy ages. So for these players that Marcelo is talking about, these types of players, let's say Toni Kroos, Rodri, Jorginho, what do you think they were like when they were at these pre-academy ages? What sort of profile, personality, the way they played the game, what might they look like as a 7-year-old?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if they'd look particularly different from what we have in our system. Yeah, I mean, and again, when I was at Tottenham, we changed everything around to going for technical. That was our watchword. Yeah, okay, look, we know they have to have some physical, but that's not the first thing. It's always about technical. And I think if clubs are looking at it in that way, I think if they come in from the other end and say it's all about physical, and then we'll add the technical, I think that's where you get the problem. So more and more clubs that it's the technical side of the game is the most important side. So I would think Toni Kroos would have been highly, highly technical and that profile would have been quite clear. And certainly the players that I think we worked on, that's where they would have come from.
In terms of technical, would it be players that are obviously comfortable with the ball but dribblers? Or is it technical with being able to receive the ball under pressure, great awareness, being able to connect at an early age?
Yeah.
I know it's different clubs have different philosophies.
Yeah, I mean, we were, and it wasn't just it, and people get sick inside it. We had this kind of 1v1, so that was what we won. We talked about, even the scouts, it was about wow moments. That was on the scouting form. Was there a wow moment? Was there a way you literally went, wow? Now, we'd caveat that by saying, look, that could be a fantastic save, or it could be a fantastic... But I used to get a lot of dissatisfied parents and saying, oh, well, I'm disadvantaged because my son can pass the ball really well. And we weren't, at that age, we weren't really a massive passing. If they had a 30-yard diag in the locker, it was good. But actually, we want you to get on the ball, stay on the ball. Because we felt at that younger age, if they could learn how to dribble, keep the ball, be comfortable with the ball, be able to dominate 1 versus 1, that we could add those other aspects. We could teach them how to pass. We could do all of those things. But unless you learn that at the younger age, you'll never have it. You can't suddenly at 13 suddenly become a dribbler, I don't think. I think you need to build those in. And I think that's probably much more of a European model. So their ability to be comfortable with the ball. And yes, have a messy game where they're going to have to receive under pressure. They're going to, and not be frightened of pressure, not be frightened of contact, but being clever, being able to know how to wriggle out of the ball, to be able to twist and turn and to stay on the ball. And we had this big thing about, don't just boot it, stay on the ball and try to get comfortable with the ball. So I think if you're doing that, then you start to produce highly technical players. But, back in the day, and it's changed, I had a good friend of mine who used to be the under 8s, 9s, I think it was probably 8s, I think we took our 8s, coach at Arsenal. And he would stand on one side and I would stand on the other side. And I wasn't the coach of that team, but I would be with that team. And I would be saying, get on the ball, take him on. He'd be saying, pass it. And I'm saying, don't pass it. And the parents would hate it because they want it nice. They want it to look like the first team. And Arsenal were great. They're playing 1 touch, 2 touch. And it was, and he was looking at me and said, what are you talking about? I said, no, you do what you do and we'll do what we do. It's just different ways, of how we think a young player should be developed.
Is there a risk that, and we have become successful, like, me and you just kind of had that bit of argument, not really argument, but I'm saying Jude Bellingham, Phil Foden, Jack Grealish even, just all the sort of talented players that we've got within the England side, but they have been potentially produced by this one-size-fits-all type coaching that does produce, it does get effective players, but there's a missing piece of the jigsaw. Are you able to have a coaching philosophy that can produce it all?
Yeah, no, I think you can. And I think, we talk about the influence of the coach. And I think it is important, the philosophy, the way in which we coach, the way that we interact with the players, the way that we give ownership, the way that we allow people to be creative. And you're right, there are some times where you think we're so restrictive in terms of our what we're telling the players to do rather than letting them play free. And again, that's because our players, unfortunately, compared to the old days, are brought up in environments where it's very regimented. You go to a training session, it starts at 6, it goes till 7:30, maybe some fantastic coaching, but they don't take any responsibility. And then you say, well, we want decision makers, and when they're on the pitch, they've never had to do it. They don't have to do anything. So how do you create situations whereby, and it's hard for coaches. I used to do it and say, right, you go and organise your training session. And people look, you can't do that. You're getting paid to do the coaching. The parents are looking at you going, well, hold on a sec, why is my 10-year-old doing it? Okay, you're not doing it every week. But actually, it's really good for them to self-organise, to get on and do their own thing and not be so, regimented. And this is how we're going to play. When you get it here, you've got to pass it to here. And when you've got to, I've been with the Italians under 9s and they'll do an hour and a half in a classroom and they'll do of tactical. And then you go, the Italians are really tactically astute. They are. They know the game inside out. I don't think that's the right way of doing it, but they've done pretty well in terms of their successes on the pitch. Whereas we would never do that in England because we're thinking an hour and a half with the 9s in a classroom or doing shadow play. No, they need to just get with the ball. So look, there are different ways to skin a cat, I guess. I'm a believer in trying to have a coach who I would call an igniter, somebody that's really going to excite the players, get them enthused about it, and giving them a framework, yes, but a freedom to play and express themselves.
I think when you said technical, like people listening to that will have different interpretations of what that is.
Yeah.
And Marcelo, you're working with a lot of parents, and probably parents will come to you because you're a super technical player and you're a great technical coach. And parents can often think, all right, if I'm going to get signed at an academy, my child has to be able to do fast step overs. They've got to be able to do very, very good drag backs, L turns, like all the skills. And it's the wow moments that they're trying to develop for their child. But then they disregard receiving the ball, being able to manipulate the ball into good spaces and so on. And so even just finishing and good ball striking. So I don't know.
It is kind of, listen, there's a kind of a thing, and I've heard it described as like literalism, and you go, well, it's technical, and they think, well, that's the only thing. So I get that, and the problem with football, not the problem with football, but it's complex.
Yeah.
You've got to be good at lots of different things. So yes, look, I want highly skillful players. And look, if you're going to be a top player, you've got to be fantastic. I mean, it's not going to be average. You know, when I was at Tottenham, we were saying we're not looking for average kids. We are looking for wow moments. We're looking for special, and that's the problem. And I think there is a little bit of, I obviously had this debate with parents and with other people saying, oh, the academy system fails because so few of them actually get through. But I'm saying, well, elite sport is different. You know, unfortunately, very few of us do make it to the very, very top. You know, there's only 11 players in a game. And you've got, by the time you get to that level, you can get any player in the world. So it's not just this talent pool of whatever we are over here, 50 million, 60 million people in England. You've got the whole world. So the chances of being successful are small. We've got more chances in this country because there are more levels to play professional football than any other country, all the way down to the National League and below. So you have got more opportunities to play, but still very few of them. So when I say highly technical, yes, they have to be highly, highly technical. Do I believe, yes, they've got to be able to manipulate the ball and be comfortable with the ball? Absolutely. But of course, they need to know how to receive it. They need to know how to pass it. They need to make good decisions. You know, they know there's a range of different skills, you know, that they're going to need to have.
Do you think football IQ, especially in the early ages, gets missed by a lot of scouts? So it might be the things they don't do with the ball, but show real football IQ. The obvious things that aren't easy to see on the eye. Do you think that gets missed out quite a lot? And then potentially do we then miss out on these really intelligent problem solvers, decision makers, players in as they get older?
Yeah, listen, we're drawn towards certain things, aren't we? So, you know, that's the danger of the wow moment. We get drawn towards that player, and they might be. That's fine. I get that, and there'll be some obvious ones. And you always have to caveat that by saying, well, are they really that good, or is it because they're bigger than everybody else? They're older than everybody else. They've had more experience of doing it. So we've got to caveat all of those things. But for me, the best scouts are who can pick the less obvious ones, the ones who, you know, my mum wouldn't have said, oh yeah, he's a good player. You know, I think she would have said David Beckham could cross the ball pretty well, and she would have gone, yeah, he's a standout. Well, yeah, okay. Would she have recognised Paul Scholes or somebody else that perhaps wasn't? Maybe not. So yeah, you're right. I think there are less obvious things that we need to make scouts aware of. So I've talked a lot about kind of psychosocial stuff. I think that's really important. You know, do they show those characteristics? Are they resilient? What happens when things don't go right? Do they still want to get back on the ball, even though when they get it they might lose it? You know, we kind of get bogged down with the fact, oh, he just gave it away again. Well, actually, keeps trying, understands the game. And at the younger age, you know what it's like when you understand the game. You know, as a parent, I remember saying to my son, when he's got into a nice space to receive the ball, well, you're never going to receive it because 9-year-olds don't pass the ball that often. But if you looked at his movement and things he was doing off the ball, it's fantastic. But in the end, you get caught up, well, you just go and chase the ball and go and get it because you don't get the hold of the ball. You might never get it as an under 8 even. So you're right. How do we pick up on these kind of more subtle things that are really, really important? And listen, and I'm not saying you still need to have at least one outstanding physical attribute. So, you know, and that's probably going to be speed or agility, you know, and it's not enough just to be a really good character. You know, you've got to have a number of things, and that's the complexities of this. It's not, yes, we talk about technical and we talk about tactical and we talk about physical, and yes, it's a combination of all those things, and some are more than others. You know, you'll get a player that might be ridiculously quick. Okay, well that might be good enough to get them where they need to get to. You'll have somebody who's less quick but technically a lot better, you know, and you think, well, that might be enough. Their brain works quicker than everybody else's, so they find the space, they're able to. So there's so many combinations, and that's why, unfortunately, if I had the answers, I'd be a multi-millionaire living on a yacht somewhere. I don't. It's a highly complex. I don't have a crystal ball that I can go and say this player's going to make it. And that's the problems. And I think that's the frustration that most people have, because nobody can say, well, definitely, if you do this, this, and this, you're going to get to there, because it's just not like that, unfortunately.
No, agreed. I need to interrupt the podcast one more time. Did you know that We Make Footballers is a franchise business? We began franchising in 2015, and we now have over 60 franchises in operation across the UK, Dubai, and US, serving over 10,000 players. If you are a talented coach but don't want to start your own coaching business alone, visit franchisewmf.com to find out how We Make Footballers can help you operate a successful football coaching company. but yeah, it can be frustrating where you as a scout are seeing some of these players and you could see this future potential. Off air, we were talking about Harvey Elliott as an example, and I think I've mentioned a few times that I was involved with being his scout, but I was able to see what I believed was this future potential despite his physicality.
Yeah.
And there's been a number of players that I've been involved with like that. And but if you're at a club where as a scout you're putting these players through, but then they keep getting rejected, they don't make it to the next rounds, you learn. We talked about that. You learn as a scout and you have to serve your employer. And so then with you at the FA, and when you were creating these talent ID programs and what you were trying to teach the scouts, what was some of this stuff you were pushing through to the heads of recruitments to say, look, give these guys a chance?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of things. One is the relationship between scouts and coaches, which can be quite fractious sometimes. The coach will say, why have you bought in this rubbish player?
Yeah.
And you say, well, it wasn't rubbish when I bought him in.
No.
It's just, you're a rubbish coach. So there is about the relationships, and often we'd do the courses where it would be CPD and both, and that would be the ideal. You have scouts in the room, you have coaches in the room, so you can get some understanding. I think the problem sometimes with coaches is that they are thinking about the here and now. You often hear, oh, he doesn't make my group better, or he doesn't get into my top three, or he doesn't, and all these kind of things. You're going, well, and we, again, very clearly at Spurs, I'd say to the coach, well, he might not be very good for you. I'm thinking about 3 years' time when he might be good for the under-16s coach. So you're just going to have to put up with it. But having a general understanding about what you're trying to do, and also trusting your scouts. So we had some various different processes in place which allowed the scouts to bring players in, and if they felt really strongly, we would try to listen to their view and we'd try to support them. Not always. And I have to say to the scouts, you've got to be thick-skinned. They don't all get in, for whatever reason. But there has to be an understanding that you've probably watched this player. You probably watched Harvey Elliott hundreds of times. He comes into a club where we watch him 2 or 3 times. Then we go, he's not good enough, or he is good enough. So there has to be that relationship between the scout and the club and the hierarchy to trust people. Now, if you've got somebody, so I had a scout once who only brought in 3 players a year, but you guarantee all 3 years sign every year. So if he bought, and we didn't one yet, well, we looked back on it and there was one player that we let go, and we said, well, why should we have kept him? He's now an international football player, he plays in the Premier League. Why? What would have been the thing? And one of the big thing was because so-and-so brought him in. And every time so-and-so brings them in, they always do it. So, so therefore you build up a reputation. So if you bring in your player, I might be going, well, I'm not sure, but you brought him in. So your track record's pretty good. So I think it's a bit about trust as relationships. I think it is hard. I think it is really hard for the coaches as well, because they do have to manage their group and they've got to manage parents and other players. But you've got to try getting thinking away from, one, that winning's the most important thing, and also 2, it's their group. It's not their group. It's a club group that they're going to have. It's a transient group that will move up next year and go somewhere else.
One of my theories on why we don't produce as many of these type of players in England is the structure of the academy programs, that they are all business models and they're very business orientated, where it's about gambling on players. We calculated that we think that it's about £55,000 per player per year to produce a Chelsea player. That was a rough calculation that we did. And so if you're gambling on a player 55,000, you really hope that they're going to have the best chance of being a professional footballer. And a lot of the academies are recognising that the player will never go and play for their parent first team, but there will be a player that they can sell on, and it helps with the FFP and all the other things. So then they start finding like formulas, and it could be that a player who athletically, genetically is a certain profile, yet they're going to, the average footballer is 6 foot. Are they taller? That is an advantage to have height. You physically move well, so on. So then, can they manipulate the ball? Are they good in 1v1s? And then we're producing, I think, a lot of these wingers, fullbacks, maybe even the centre backs that are good athletically, not so many like John Stones type players, but it becomes like something that you can churn out, almost like a factory. And so then it is good for all those positions, that the academies are producing, but it doesn't necessarily help the FA, it doesn't necessarily help England to win tournaments, because we'll see when we play against Spain if that happens. Will we be able to control the game enough? Will we be able to have enough possession? And yeah, that's kind of my theory.
Like Richard said, but then the clubs are spending 60 million on these types of players anyway, so
yeah, but
why not?
It's cheaper to do that than try to recruit those players who you think that's a highly intelligent player, that is a player who's got good personality.
It cost the clubs 60 million plus to produce that.
Well, you're spending £55,000 a year, and then you have to keep releasing these kids because they reach their athletic ceiling and they can't move around the pitch well enough. So you keep releasing those because they're hard to produce.
But it's again, you might be right. I guess that's the thing: is do you call it a formula? Or do you call it something that you link with your club's philosophy? So there's certain types of players that you're trying to produce. So, yeah, I mean, you could describe it in that kind of more harsh way, that it's about the business. And you're right. Chelsea were at a point where I used to look at them and think, well, you've got a third of our best players, but none of them are going to play in the first team. But you're providing lots of players for the game. It's a great model in terms of that. But up until the time of COVID, and I suppose when Frank Lampard came in, and suddenly they started playing because they had to, and when they had the ban on the kind of transfers, suddenly actually, your players are really good.
Yeah.
And there's some really good players who could actually play at that level. And that was kind of the breakthrough, because pathway is everything. And if you haven't got a pathway, now, you're right, at Tottenham. So we had our philosophy was the main objective is to get people into our first team, stay on our first team, and make our first team better. But below that were different levels, all the way down to things like providing players for the game, to producing nice young men that could go and make a living, and not just have a good life. Maybe play football on the side on a Sunday, but a decent level, but just generally nice kids. Now, was the chairman that interested in that group? Probably not. He's not a charity, he's running a business. But the reality is you're not going to get everybody in the top level, because it can't happen. It's just not the spaces. It will never happen. You'll get a golden generation like they had at Man U, or even with Tottenham when we had a few players. But the reality is you're in the Premier League and they're going to bring players in. But you're right, I think there is a weakness in the system in terms of how do we produce certain types of players, especially if those players exist elsewhere and we just go and buy them. But physicality might be one. But then you look at Kante. Kante's brilliant. Kante's tiny.
No, but he's got unbelievable acceleration.
Yes, so he's got some physical attributes, but it might not be you have to be a 6 foot giant to be able to do that. And if you look at the best Spanish and the Portuguese players, they're not giants. Now some we've got some big physical characteristics in certain positions in certain teams. But
these are all players that we admire.
Yeah.
So and what I think about in terms of like the difference with that's why I asked about what Rodri, Jorginho, Kroos would have been like when they're 6 and 7, because I think in England, Kante does come through. I think we pick him because I think his acceleration is enough. Yeah, his height might have been smaller than other kids, but he moved so quick, so he's still effective. Whereas Bernardo Silva maybe is that sort of player who's so ineffective, and he's going into these environments where just getting bullied, not getting on the ball. When I say bullied, I mean just like on the ball, getting pushed off it. So then he looks very, very ineffective.
But this is where we got to be good enough to notice the intent behind what the player's doing, and we got to be strong enough as a club or an FA to go, not yet, but give him time.
And in fairness, I mean, we've both been on the Talent 2 course that Richard taught us, and this is why we were so excited to have Richard join us for this conversation today. You were teaching us this stuff on the course. This is subjects that you teach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think trying to get people to be more patient.
Yeah.
And some clubs, there, as you just said, the cost of keeping a player in the system is quite high. And if you're at a big club, you can afford to do that. So I was always very impressed. One of the best developers of players in this country has been Manchester United in terms of the continually bringing players into their first team. And Kobe, I was in the first team playing for England. A good young midfield player, fantastic. But they were always a club that gave more. So rather than letting somebody go, they'd give them another year or give them another 2 years. And they weren't frightened about giving players more time to develop. Whereas other clubs were like, right, 18, gone. We're not going to keep them any longer because we don't have the resource, we don't have the patience to keep somebody. And if you're at 18 at Man United, they'll probably keep you till you're 21, 22, 23. You know, they'd keep you in there if they believed you had the chance. But they weren't frightened of doing that, where other clubs were so kind of, we've got to make a decision today, and that's where it comes to that benefit that cutthroat, but also, and listen, I get it. If you know, every academy, even when I was at Tottenham, you think, oh, it's a really rich club, but we had a really tight budget. You know, we couldn't go above that. We just wouldn't get the money. So you do have to make some tough decisions. The rules are in place, so you know the amount of players that you can have registered. That doesn't always help. You know, even though it's like still 30 when you're younger, gets down to 20. But you know, sometimes you just want to keep players in the system and trying to figure out ways of how to keep them in there, because being patient with them is, I think, is really, really important. So yeah, how do we educate people across the club? But then we've got to educate people above. I think the technical directors are good, but then it's the CEO and the owners to also be a little bit patient, because you know, all over the world they're saying the same things. You know, the owner wants the team to win. You know, Abramovich is looking at Chelsea saying, I want my teams to win. You know, that's the first important. I guess there are other people saying, well, yeah, that's important. We need to keep the owner happy. But it's more important that we develop players that have a pathway to go through. But does the system have a weakness? We had a weakness at Tottenham that because of the type of players we went for, we never had any centre halves. So we were always looking at the back end. So Stephen Corker came in at 16. Hadn't been on one trial at Reading, was going to go to Southampton. They played Reading, put him as a left winger. We said no chance, and we signed him the same night to stop him from going to Southampton. Yeah, and you know, he had a decent career, but I was always at 16, 17 being sent out to look for centre halves, because we just didn't produce them, because we had all technical players that could play in other positions, but not in that one.
Marcelo, you've worked at numerous clubs in London, nearly all of them. Haven't worked at Arsenal, haven't worked at West Ham, a bit far away from you. But in your experience working with academies at younger ages, the environment that's put out for players to be assessed in, Richard talked about it earlier with a lot of 1v1s, does that facilitate the coaches and scouts to be able to see that type of player who maybe has strengths with decision making and connecting with other players?
I think in the younger ages there is a bit of emphasis on more 1v1s, 2v2s, that side of things, and like that's the reason why I asked before, do you think at the younger ages it gets missed, like the other things you don't see? Because I think it's just more obvious on the eye, like the wow moments. But I do think there's the environment that's set that I see. We generally just want the best players, and that will be different types of players. I've seen that from my experience, and the practices there isn't no, we want just this type of player, so we're going to do just this type of practice. There is a broad topics that are coached to the players. But I think it's
do you think
a bit
be
of an interpretation to each coach and their biases and what they want to look for as well.
And you're Portuguese. Do you think that our environments are very different from Spain and Portugal?
I think it's maybe a different way of looking at football, I feel. But like you said, not every country has to be the same. I do see some differences in just the way we view football. Yeah.
Okay.
But it's really interesting for me as well, because you know, we've got this kind of model over here where we have games programs. You know, we don't have league tables. It's not, you know, we try to make sure it's about development, about winning.
Yeah.
And you think, well, if you go to Spain, would that be the same? It's not. Flipping it, in Spain, they have keep league tables. It's in the under nines, and it will say Barcelona played 10, won 10, scored 200 goals, and they don't give a damn about, you know, and we're like, well, now, I think the reason behind that is that our English culture is different. So what will happen is, if we said that in England, you as the coach would be now thinking, well, I'm being judged on winning the game. So it becomes, and we just revert to type. So I've seen it before where we will go 4-4-2 and just lump it and score from corners and free kicks. Whereas I think if you say in Holland or you say in Spain, it's competitive. It doesn't change the style of football. It doesn't change. And in fact, I always give the example of Holland. You know, if you go to the equivalent of Hackney Marshes, where, you know, we would see football, you know, 4-4-2, and it'd be a bit of a fright, and we all love it, and that's what we go there for. if you go to the equivalent of the pub side in Holland, it's 4-3-3 with wide wingers. They get really upset if you played any other style. And that's just the culture of the country. And it's evolved and changed. But I think if we started doing too much like that, I always worry that the coach changes. And, when I first went to Tottenham, the under 12 coach would be like, "Oh, we lost. Am I going to get the sack?" And you go, No.
Yeah.
If you do the wrong thing, if you're a bad coach and you're doing the wrong things, you might have won 5-0 and you might get the sack because you're just not playing the way we want you to play.
Yeah.
So I think that's the difference. And that's a kind of a cultural thing that we're still, I think, kind of not quite sure about in this country.
There was something on the Talent ID course that I did with you where you said, and I don't know if this has changed now, but at the time, in academies, there was more blonde kids than any other type of player in the whole of the academies in England.
Yeah, it may have changed now, but certainly the research at that time was to say that was, if you looked across it, there was a certain type. Now, again, in their individual teams, is that because that's the way that they stood out, or does that just pander to the biases of the people that were selecting them? I guess I don't know. And in certain parts of the country it'll look differently. I think it has changed generally. If you look at the clubs now, I think they're more multicultural. I think there is a different look. But certainly at that time, and I think that was a bias because that's what people's eyes are drawn to. It's the I don't know if you've seen Moneyball, but it's the bit where they're saying it's the body shape. He looks great. He looks like a player, and sometimes that's in our minds as a scout or as a coach. Oh yeah, just look at the way he looks, the way he moves. And he just kind of fits that image of what a football player should look like. I think we've moved on since then.
Do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I haven't seen any research to say. And if I look at games, and because I still do some work at Loughborough University, and we have a lot of the Premier League tournaments there. If I look at that, I think there's a bit of a mix. Certain parts of the country, not so much, but more often.
Oh, yeah. I could believe with what you say about the diversity changing, but in terms of what you do on that course to teach the scouts about bias and especially unconscious bias, that probably is still inherent within scouting.
Yeah, I agree. Listen, I think there are things that scouts, and we try to educate them, and I'm still doing that. So I'm doing some work now with FIFA, and that's really important to me, that there's some fundamentals that people have to understand. So I think there's some basic concepts. So they have to understand about performance versus potential. They have to understand about relative age effect, the impact of maturation, both psychologically and physically. But I think also the impact of bias and just recognizing that unconscious bias, because I think people sometimes think, oh no, you're attacking me, it's a negative, because it's used in a kind of a negative kind of, you're biased, it's quite aggressive. But actually it's just accepting that, yeah, we do, of course we are. We're all unconsciously biased because we've been socialised and we've been brought up in a certain way. You're biased towards Portuguese football, you might be more English football, but that's our culture, and that's how we've been brought up about how we see things through our parents, through wherever it might be. So again, recognising that is so important. And I think, every course that I'm ever involved in, we do quite detailed work on that, just to get people to recognise. And then it's about like relative age effect, or it's okay knowing about it, but what are you going to do about it? How do you challenge? And things like my old boss, John McDermott, used to be quite slow in making decisions about everything. And you're thinking, oh God, just come on, let's go. But actually, I think that's one of the great strategies about making sure it's not about bias. It's about slowing down the decision making, just being really careful, getting different views, different opinions, rather than just going with your gut alone and suddenly going, and then you get it wrong more often than not. So yes, okay, you can't be in a competitive world. If you're too slow, you miss the boat. But you've got to just time it right.
And so this brings me on to the next subject that I wanted to just cover with you, which was the influence of data in scouting. Right. So what have you seen with this in recent years?
Yeah, it's evolved, and I'm a great believer in, data informed. I don't think data is the answer to everything, because there's lots of context, there's lots of things that you have to consider. But certainly gets rid of some of the debate that you used to have. So I remember having we used to have selection meetings at the FA, and we'd go through all the players, and you'd have debates about, does he score, doesn't he score? And you think, well, just look, here's the data.
Yeah.
He clearly does or he doesn't. It's quite easy to ascertain. And I had one coach who was making a case. We were trying to make a case for a fullback. And he just said, oh no, he can't defend the far post.
All right.
Don't like it, can't defend the far post. You go, okay. And then here's the data. It's absolutely fine. The game doesn't get played like that particularly, but if he did, he was absolutely fine at defending the far post. He won his headers, he could do whatever he had, But then I soon realised actually what the coach really was saying was, I don't really like small fullbacks. I like big tall ones. And his way of not saying that, because that wouldn't have been the correct, when people would have challenged him or saying, I don't think he can. So in that sense, the data was really useful because it got rid of all that noise. It just was like, this is very clear. He can or he can't. And okay, there's the evidence. Now you've got to come up with some other reason why you don't want to select him. So I think that's really useful. I think more generally how it's evolved is, a lot of clubs are using data obviously as maybe the first port of call in terms of their recruitment strategy. So they've got huge amounts of data on lots of players from across the world, and they can look at good value, and they can make some, you're looking for this type of player, this kind of profile, and this player will match it. Now you've got to contextualize it, because this player might be playing in the German second division and we want him to be playing in the Championship. Is there a match between those two things? But it gives you a head start, and I think it gives you some extra information. The younger you go, obviously the less data there is. Now there is still data, because we say, data is just about numbers. Well, actually data can come from your scouting reports. If you're gathering the information from there, that creates data. But generally there's less information about younger players, so you still need people on the ground to go and have a look and find them.
I think that's going to change. Yesterday I was presented with this video. They have this, like, it's like a video camera. Yeah. I forget the name of it, but basically it will record the game and then it tracks everyone individually, and then after the game the AI will then create a report on every player. I don't know if you come across this.
I've heard of it, yes. Yeah.
B Pro I think it might be called. And it is incredible. And the level of data that comes from this, it's got your successful take-ons, your tackles, your interceptions, your shots, running distances, everything. And so then imagine, like, because you said, all right, there's not really data on younger players, but if
not as much,
but then if this then starts to be built in, and then even at Chelsea we've got AI Scout, and they're bringing in AI into the scouting. Someone said to me recently, there'll be no need for scouts anymore in the future.
Yeah. And listen, I still think there are lots of things that you can't measure. So if I'm making my case like I did earlier, the difference between good and great is kind of the more psychological, social qualities they have. I haven't seen any system that measures that particularly well. Yeah. So you still need somebody to go and see that. You need somebody that will kind of work out the cultural fit with a small c. Like, do they, because, I've been involved at one of the biggest clubs in the world, and we will go and sign a player thinking, we've just signed the best player, and they'll come in and they'll be really good. And they're not. And you go, well, why not? Well, the fit wasn't right. You're moving somebody from one part of the world into North London, and it's the whole piece. It's not. So yes, there are some technical things and there's some other things, but there's so many other factors, and you need people to work that out.
The intent part. It could be 10 through balls that he's not been able to make, but he's seen the pass. Yeah. Can they measure, in the future, would he be able to do it? Yeah. That sort of thing.
So there are those, absolutely. I think that's a really good point. And also, what are you measuring? What's important? How does it link with your philosophy? Is it about how many entries into the final third? What type of runs, even though they don't get it? So success with the younger ones can't be the only criteria in terms of, when they talk about past success. Well, as you say, the intent might be there, but they can't execute it right now. So how do you measure those things? So yes, I think it can be informed and it can be helped by it, but I don't think it's not a utopia. You are also, there is, especially with AI, you're limited in terms of, you've got to teach it, you've got to put the right information. So how do you make sure that information is the correct information to get it to the level? So I think people see it as this great thing, but I think there will be some issues with it. It's not going to be the utopia that I think we think it's going to be or could be. And I think you're still going to need people that have knowledge, experience and expertise, because you need skilled people as well.
Off air, you were telling us about the work you're doing with Arsene Wenger at the moment. Would you mind just telling us a little bit about that?
Yeah, no, it's really exciting. So really pleased. I was out in Japan. I was working at a club there back in 2022 as kind of technical director, and I started doing some work. FIFA asked me if I, in the region, would get involved in the new talent development scheme, which is Arsene Wenger's kind of idea of trying to level up the competitive level around the world. Football predominantly is dominated by Europe, a little bit of South America because you've got Argentina and Brazil. But if you look at quarterfinalists, semi-finalists, winners of World Cups, it's generally Europe that dominate. How do we change that? How do we get more Japan beating Germany and Spain in the last World Cup, and Morocco's, or some of the African nations that should probably do better than they have done. How do we raise that competitive level? And he's got a mantra of give every talent a chance, and that's not from a grassroots perspective. It's about talented players. So my role with FIFA is, alongside other colleagues, is to go into various countries and give them support with their technical director and at that kind of level to try and help them with their national teams. And we'll look at things like in country, their competition. We'll look about coach education and their academy setup, their talent ID, and a range of other things that we'll look up to try and support them. And the countries can access some funding, which is great, but actually it's more about knowledge exchange. It's about me being the thinking partner, the technical director. So I'm helping a couple of countries now, Hungary and Hong Kong, on that basis. But we've also just started up a talent ID program, because I think 80% of the applicants for funding for the TDS was about talent ID, and most countries, even the European ones, are struggling in that area, really trying to understand through education and about systems and processes how to really ensure that they aren't missing players, because there's a notion that actually a lot of countries are. So I'm supporting Kyrgyzstan and India. India is a great challenge, 1.4 billion people. How do you make sure you're trying to get the best and the most talented players to come and make their national team even better? And it's a challenge. And you'd say, well, Croatia do really well. Maybe it's easier to do with a small population in a small country, because actually there's lots of good competition, there's lots of good clubs, and it's in a relatively small area. And to go and scout around India,
football's the main predominant sport.
We talked earlier about this. If you look at the serial winners, football is absolutely their number one passion. It's their number one sport. So nobody mentions the size of Brazil. Brazil is absolutely huge, but that doesn't seem to be a problem compared to India, where it's huge. But that's because Brazil is just a football country, and they've got levels of competition in every single area. Everybody loves and plays football. Whereas in other countries, India being one, their cricket structure is out of this world. That's why they've got the best cricketers. Everything you'd want in football, they've got in cricket, and cricket is their number one sport. And other countries, I worked in Japan, baseball is the number one sport. So baseball is fantastic there. They've got some of the best players playing over in America. Football is their number two. Now it's creeping up and it's getting better, but it's still not their number one sport. Whereas in Germany and England and Spain and Portugal, it's everything to us. And I think, that shouldn't be underestimated.
Because, sorry, were you about to speak? No. Off air, I was explaining how we get a lot of messages from people from America who say that they're really determined for their child to be a good footballer, but they feel that they don't really have the opportunity because where they're based, there's a really weak soccer program for them. And I mean, that kind of then comes into the whole nature and nurture part of the conversation, because some people will say, my child was born to be a footballer, but if you're in the wrong environment, then there's kind of no chance for you. I'm just going to interrupt the podcast for 30 seconds to tell you about We Make Footballers. We Make Footballers are the largest football coaching provider to children aged 4 to 12 in the UK, operating across 200 facilities. We focus on developing the individual, working on the technical and physical components of the game, and it's had amazing results, with hundreds of our ex-players joining professional academies and 4 of our ex-players currently playing in the Premier League. Our program is built around small-sided play using indoor and outdoor facilities. Visit our website, WeMakeFootballers.com, to see if we have a training facility in your area.
Yeah. And environment and culture is everything, it's really difficult if you haven't got that opportunity. And listen, it happens in other sports. Maybe I could have been, I don't know, the best rower in the world, but I never had access to a boat or a bit of water. So therefore, I don't know if I would have been really good at it, because I never had that opportunity. I doubt it, because I think in a sport like rowing, although there are some technical pieces to it, it's mostly about physicality, and I don't think my arm span and my physical capacity is probably good. So I would say that there are some sports where genetics, the nature piece, is really, really important, and that could be the more physical sports. So I say, I'm not saying that rowing doesn't have some technical aspects. Of course it does. Cycling the same. Of course it has some technical, but it's all about physical. And I've seen talent ID programs in both those sports where they just literally go and test and measure people, and either you're in or you're out, and we can teach you to do the rest quite quickly. Unfortunately, football's not like that. So yes, there are some attributes that you might have to have. So for example, you probably do need to be quite tall if you're a goalkeeper. Okay, there are some examples where they're not so tall, but you're not going to be a good goalkeeper at international level if you're very small. And some people are very small or small compared to the rest of the population. That is genetic. There's nothing really I can do to make you any taller. You are either going to be taller or you're not. Unfortunately, there's nothing we can do about it. And it can be heartbreaking. So I've seen some really good goalkeepers in the younger age groups who unfortunately just never get tall enough, and that's the only thing that's going against them. They might be technically excellent, they can do other things, but they just will never get the opportunity. Now maybe they should, maybe some of them could have coped with the demands of the game, maybe it's the bias of the coaches and the way that football is, but across the world you very rarely see lots and lots of 5'7" goalkeepers. It's just not the way it is, unfortunately. And there might be certain other positions on the pitch. Again, you'll say central defenders, and you'll say, well, how about this player or this player? Yeah, there are some examples, but generally there's a physicality, and that comes with genetics. I think, unfortunately, you're either quick or you're not quick. I think you can become more explosive, and there are certain things in your running style to improve it slightly. But I can't suddenly become Usain Bolt. You know, and people say to me, well, that Usain Bolt that's his genetics. That's him with his genetics, that he's able to run that fast. His height, his stride length, all those kind of things. Can he develop it and get even better? Yes, because he can become a better starter and he can become more explosive. But football, there are so many, it's decision makings, it's technical, it's all these other things. And I said at the beginning, there's no question that to be a top player, you probably do need to have at least one outstanding physical attribute. It's probably nothing can get you away with that. It's not good enough just to be, he's a really good guy, he's really nice, and he's got really determined. Well, I've seen lots of people like that, but you've got to be able to play the game. And you probably do need to have some sort of physical capacity. And you might be, we talked about it outside, there's evidence to say that some people are more predisposed through genetics to have different injuries. So ACLs, for example, there is some evidence to suggest that, you know, you just might be more likely to get it than I am. And that's just unfortunate. You know, you talk about top players, so mentioned Ledley King. So Ledley King was one of the best, most outstanding football players I've ever seen. But he had real problems with his knees. Now, is that overuse as a younger player? Well, yeah, he probably played every single game for his, I always used to say, he played Saturdays, Sundays, his uncle team on a Sunday afternoon, and he would play for the school teams. Did he get good rehab or medical care? So maybe not. Or was he just predisposed to having that issue with his knee? And I think that was probably it, genetically, that his knee was a certain, you know, formed in a certain way that meant that this happened more often than not, and he had problems with it. And there's nothing you can do about it. You know, however good he is, and he still had a really good career, but he would have been even better if he hadn't had those issues. So genetics clearly do play a part, but I think still for me, nature, the environment that you create, the opportunities. And people say, oh yeah, well, you know, more players come from those parents that are more sporting. Well, yeah, possibly, because they're more access to the game or access to sport. It becomes natural from birth that, you know, dad would have given them a football or a football kit, or it's on the television, or you go out on the weekends. You're just immersed in that kind of world, and the support that you know, and you guys working in academies know, actually, to get a child into an academy is tough. Just the commitment that you have to give to it, and some people just can't do that. Now, I've seen other examples of where parents haven't been that supportive and children still make that effort. And again, maybe it's a bit like relative age effect. Maybe it makes you work even harder to get somewhere, and that determination to make it to Cobham. You know, all our training grounds are always out somewhere. It's not easy to get to. And I know there are transport things now in place. So for me, yes, there's some nature stuff and there's some, you know, genetic stuff, but there's also this whole piece around the environment, the culture, the people that are around you influencing you. And that's why we need scouts. That's why we need coaches. You know, we need scouts to give opportunities to kids to get into a system. Yeah. And then we need coach to be able to help them develop them. So it's a complex.
It's a complex conversation, but an answer. But yeah, I think you've given it really well, and I would agree with the way that you've answered that. Where we're at now, around episode 50, my conclusion is that if you wanted to make your kid into a footballer, in theory, yeah, you kind of can. There's a lot of stuff that is working for players who've had success. There's a lot of linked patterns and good environments and weaker environments, but there is still genetic ceilings, and some parents, unfortunately, they're going to have kids who, even if they're like, super healthy kids, they still wouldn't have the genetic ability to be a footballer. And I think that's a realization.
But that's like, you just might not be technically good enough. You might not be. There's a whole range of things, the reason why you might be. But there are some things that unfortunately may be more out of your control. And I think that's what people don't like. Everybody, I think in society generally, we always want kind of the easy fix and just to say everything is possible. Yeah. Well, I think unfortunately in life, the prima ballerina is prima ballerina because they're the best ballerina and they've had to go through, and there would have been lots of children that wanted to be that, but for whatever reason physically they're not able to do it. There's just not that capability. I might want to play in the NBA, but I can't because I'm just not ever going to be tall enough. And there's and I think maybe that's easier to stomach. I think maybe more people will go, actually I get that, you need to be 6'7", and I'm never going to be that. I'm going to be, now we go, well, okay, there's always a little one that kind of, okay, well, yeah, maybe. But I think that's probably easier for people to see than it is in football, where you do see a variety of different shapes and sizes. But even the one that you would say is, saw Shaqiri come on the other day, and you think he doesn't look like your archetypal football player, but he's still quicker than me and you. He can still get around. He's still agile. All right, he's not the same as Gareth Bale is, but they're just different. Yeah. But there is a level that you have to reach and attain physically. Yeah,
me and my friend were talking about Shaqiri and saying that he's probably had to adapt his game where he comes on towards the end of the game due to his physicality. Maybe that's to his age now. But
yeah, I think age.
Oh, right.
When he was younger, he was pretty quick.
But he did always play 90 minutes, even with that build.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, fair enough.
But what I'm saying is that that's the thing, isn't it? And we talked about in the courses, it's not linear. So people's journeys are all different. That's it. And there are different types. Not everybody's the same. It's not like everybody is 6'2" in a certain shape and size. Yeah. Thankfully, because we don't have this one size fits all, and we've seen success. I used to go and watch Spain versus England, and England would all be 6 foot. Your Frank Lampards, and they would be fantastic. They're all fantastic players. And you see this little Spanish team who just run rings around them. They couldn't get anywhere near them, got underneath them, and we'd say, "Oh, he can't play. He's too small." Well, you know what? They cope and they manage, and they, the little ones that we used to have. They were really clever. Tom Carroll was just really clever, in terms of where he received the ball, how he received it. And I'd watch Luka Modric. Luka Modric he's not very big. Okay, he's big around the bottom, down there, his thighs, and he's kind of, but he's smart the way he plays. He doesn't. You never see him get smashed. You'd never see him get totaled by somebody because he would have received the ball in space, he would have turned, he would have invite contact sometimes, but he'd always be in control of it, and the ball would be gone before we got close to him. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, I took a play on at QPR that was little, and I said, let's offer him early, and he just used to, he's broken his arm, he's broken his leg. And he was almost too brave because he didn't understand that he was small and he had to play in a certain way. And he just wasn't smart enough to work that out. Whereas Tom Carroll was, Luka Modric was, these kind of players. And I'm not saying Tom Carroll and Luka Modric are on the same level, but they're small. Yeah, you can go to the Messis and people like that because they're so technically good. They rarely get hit because they've come up with coping strategies, probably because they are different shapes and sizes.
Richard, thank you so much for your time today. It's been incredible, exactly kind of as I'd hoped it to be. We end each episode with asking our guest what has been their proudest moment. So what has been your proudest moment in your career that you?
I think that's really it's a tough one, and I've been really lucky to have lots of moments. Players making their debuts and. Seeing players go on, and you talk about the Harry Kanes and people like that, you've had something to do with, and by no means it's Harry Kane is because of me. There's lots of he came in on my watch, but lots of people more involved in his development. But that's fantastic when you see a player reaching that kind of heights. Yeah. But as I said at the right beginning, my proudest moments are Mehmet Ali being the under-21s coach at Arsenal. I can't, that fills me full of joy. That I used to coach him as a 15, 16-year-old in Hackney and got him through a programme where he's gone. Michael Donaldson's doing so well, and all these guys. Lee Hayes in Hong Kong. There's a national coach. Who's just a little street urchin from Hackney that used to walk around with a ball and do kick-up competitions and stuff like that. So for me, as much as it's great to have won an under-17s World Cup and been around with the Phil Fodens and you knowing those people, and you know, knowing somebody like Gareth Southgate, who's a fantastic man, and who, you know, I still get kind of blown away when he says hello Richard, you know, because he knows me, and of course I know him and he knows my family, and it's great. But yeah, for me it's the Rob Nichols, it's the Mehmet Ali's, it's the Michael Donaldsons, it's a whole list of people that have gone into the game and have come from nowhere and are now, I can't believe it. You know, I think Mehmet will be with the first team soon. How fantastic is that for where he's come from? So yeah, for me, having played a part in his development and hopefully along the way giving him some opportunities and you know, leg up where I can. But having done it all himself and all these guys, yeah, you can help them a little bit, but they've all got to grab it and go on and be really good. You can't get those jobs unless you're really, really good, and they are really, really good.
That's really cool. I'm very, very close friends with Michael. When we did a talk here at Spotify and he talked about his journey, everyone was asking him how did he get to become the Arsenal coach, and he put it down to you. Like he said, you know, he talked about that in playing for you, and yeah, you giving him his first chance. So yeah, nice class that you that with everything that you've done, that you talk about those relationships and, you know, and those people do well. No, that's really class. Thank you so much, Richard.
No problem. Thank you very much.
Yeah, pleasure. Thank you.